Well, good morning and welcome to another look in the mirror. I'm trying to think of another way to introduce my videos, and I like the idea of looking in the mirror because it's a very simple, I guess, way to understand the action of mind that is prevalent when we embark upon that transitionary period that we call spiritual path, between identities, where we go from being or having an identity of ourselves as thinking that we are a physical entity on a physical planet, blah 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 blah, to taking on board for ourselves that may not be so, and making inquiries into our spiritual nature until we have an experience or experiences of non-temporal things that prove to us and show to us that in fact our spiritual self or spirit mind is what we are, and the body is just our vessel. And it's easy to accept that on the surface. It's, that sounds reasonable and everybody talks about it that way, etc. But you have to have your own experience. It's one thing to listen to somebody else climb a mountain and tell you how beautiful it is at the top, but until you do it yourself, it's not your own experience, and you don't get to take the photo. That's not a particularly good analogy, so don't use that one. So the mirror, let's say, and I'll just explain a little bit, because I had a friend of mine who's new to our circle. We have a little thing we do on a Tuesday here, and it's sort of spilling over now to a Monday and a Tuesday, a gathering, and where we go through all this stuff. But I was reminded this morning in reading one of her posts how fragile relationships can be when you don't understand, or when you don't perceive the lessons in them and the actual purpose of them. I mean, on the surface, we tend to think that relationships with others are for whatever we can get out of it, and that's the truth. We rarely think of what we can put into it. And even though we like to think of ourselves as nice people and all of this sort of stuff, if you break a relationship down, there's as much give and take in any relationship, and some people will say, well, I'm all give and this person's all take, whatever. But it's a teaching, learning relationship, and the equilibrium has to be the same. You have to both come to the same level of teaching, learning, and everything in the world, because that's what a relationship is for. You join together in a relationship to come out further ahead in your own evolutionary growth, let's say, or maturation, than when you went in. But if you're comparing who's giving the most and who's not giving the most and all of that sort of thing, you're missing the lesson. You're missing the opportunity to grow and to use that decision to join together to your mutual advantage. So the mirror is something that I know I've spoken about it before, and it's a very easy one to do. It's much like people talk now about shadow work. Well, it's the same thing really, and I don't like the idea of shadow work, because it tends to suggest the idea that all your spiritual work is done in relationship to the darkness within you, or those dark ideas, the things you don't want to look at that have been repressed or abused or whatever. Whereas the true nature of spiritual work is, man, whatever shows up, the good and the bad, because you don't want either. It's the yin and the yang of each other, and the good stuff that you think about yourself and others is only a flip side of the bad stuff that justifies what you think good is. Can you hear that? So when you look in the mirror, what you're looking for is an overall picture of yourself right now, or a reflection of yourself. So the mirror is an idea of a whole mind. And when you come to the world, we seem to be anything but whole-minded. We have values and meanings that we give to various different things, but we don't see the oneness and the wholeness in everything. We have that as a beautiful idea, perhaps, but we sing songs about it, one love, one heart, all of those sort of things. But when it comes to living that unconditionally loving path, when it comes to seeing the oneness in everything, the mirror is cracked. We see various size pieces and fragments, and we give emotional value to all sorts of different relationships. This one superficial, this one more indentured to my heart, closer to me, etc. And we go through life looking at big pieces of the reflection and little pieces and not seeing the whole, because we're distracted with the cracks, we're distracted with the divisions. This is mine, that's yours. We divide everything up into worthiness or relationship values based on our ideas of what we think life is, the meaning that we want to give life, that we ascribe to ourselves because we don't really know what the meaning of life is. We seem to be born into a world with a complete amnesia about who I really am, why am I here, what is God, is there a God, what's the world for, all of this stuff, these complete fundamental ignorances that we ignore and charge about the world making up a meaning for every little cracked piece of the mirror that we see because we ignore it. But literally looking into the mirror and being willing to repair or heal or accept atonement for the little pieces, big pieces, whatever, as being an equal piece of the whole as they show up, is how we begin to heal our mind of the fracturedism that we perceive around us as separate things, separate people, separate relationships. Now, the two basic tenets of any spiritual path, any true spiritual path, is that there is nothing outside the mind, and that time is not sequential. Everything's going on right here in my mind right now. And that can be confronting, It's like to realize that the outside world is a symbolic picturing of an internal state of mind. If I'm seeing a distressed and an upset world and a vengeful world and a horrible world, whatever, that's a reflection that I've projected out onto it. If I'm honest, I look at the world and I go, I don't know what the hell the world is. I don't know why it's like this. And then I can begin to make inroads into stopping my judgments, into letting go of judging everything based on my new understanding that, hang on a minute, I don't know what the world's for. Stop judging it as good, bad, or anything else, and let all of that kind of thinking go, and leave an open space in your mind where that little fractured piece of mirror seemed to show up, where that it can actually be healed miraculously. And the spiritual path is a miraculous one, because you are learning to make, or learning to reconnect with your higher mind, with your God mind or your Buddha mind, whatever you want to call it, the other 96% of your mind that does everything else, which you're completely ignorant of, because you're completely focused on the 4 or 5% that's engaged in the see, hear, smell, touch, taste, physical realm. But mind is whole, right? The mirror is a whole mirror, despite the cracks we think we see in it, born out of our ignorance of why we're here and what it's all about. Well, I like this and I don't like that. I'll give this one a big piece of mirror, and I'll give that one a little piece of mirror, and I won't engage in those little pieces. I'll just ignore that, and I'll stick with the bigger pieces because I can see myself better in the bigger piece. Right? We always like to look into the pieces in the mirror that we think reflect the nice stuff about us. Well, I'm a good person and that person's an arsehole. But you wouldn't know what an arsehole was unless arsehole was an idea of reference in your own mind, an idea of judgment in your own mind that you've projected out onto the world and are seeing and are getting the result of, and feeling like you have to defend yourself against arseholes rather than learn the lesson that God didn't create arseholes, God is only love. Therefore, what I'm seeing must be an illusion. What I'm seeing must be nothing more than my own judgments projected onto some other brother who's just as confused as why the world is the way it is and whatever. Right? Let me let go of that judgment on that brother and extend a hand of learning and teaching and healing to them, and begin to help them come to see that, hang on a minute, nobody here knows what's going on. That'll be kind of fun. It'll be scary at first. It's like, holy shit. It's like we're on a runaway train and no one's at the controls. We're all just looking out the window going, wow, look at that. You'll have to excuse my raspy voice this morning. I'm undergoing a period of healing, and I don't know what it is. I'll just call it healing. I don't want to give it a name. I'm just going to leave it open to the miracle. But my throat is a little bit raw in the idea of my bodily association, so I'm just going to let it be that. So the mirror, the job is, right, the spiritual job is to heal the mirror. Not out there in the situations and relationships that show up, but in my ideas about them. Right? Now, you have to look at it from a whole perspective. If God is everything, and God is love, and God is formless, God is all-encompassing, right, then what doesn't share those values can't be God. But if God is everything, then what is it? It has to be an illusion. It has to be a dream. It has to be some kind of fantasy of self, some kind of idea of a life separate from God, which is impossible if God is everything. If God is all-encompassing, there cannot be God, there cannot be love and fear. Right? We have two human states, two human emotions, love and fear, and everything we think comes from either one of those two states. Everything we think gives rise to the vision of a different world as we use those fearful or loving eyes to see through. And in the ignorance of the nature of the world, it's a sure bet that we tend to see sometimes through loving eyes and sometimes through fearful eyes. But I'm going to throw a spanner in the works and tell you that if it's not unconditional love, it's not love at all. So the idea that I could see love in some things and fear in another is false. And my attempt to maintain my ideas of what I think love should look like is what's keeping me in hell. I don't like that. Love shouldn't look like that. It's like, well, stop judging what you think love ought to look like and learn the lesson that none of this in its entirety is what love is. The physical nature of anything is nothing more than an illusion, a projection of the mind that depicts a state, an inner state. And as you begin to use the mirror to heal your mind of the idea of good and bad, yin and yang, right and wrong, should and shouldn't, and everything like that, those opposites of judgment, as you begin to use the mirror and look honestly in the mirror at what you see reflected back at you, for your own self-forgiveness for that projection, you'll realize that you start to have these little shifts in your consciousness, and you no longer react or are no longer triggered by the same sorts of things that you once saw in the mirror, because the mirror is becoming whole. And I hope that makes sense. Right? You have a perfect reflection which the mirror will reveal to you whether or not you are seeing it. If you see the Christ or the Buddha or the Krishna in your brother, the animating force, the God, the whatever, the light, which is an actual light experience. And I love, when I was younger, I read the book, I can't remember what it's called now. If I think of it, I'll let you know. But anyway, it was even in the Course in Miracles, in one of the early lessons, I think lesson 16 or something, it says you'll begin to see little edges of light around the same familiar objects that you see now. And it's like, well, light is what we are. We are beings of light. We are spirit. And the body, being only our vessel, is our tool for exploration, if you like, in the physical realm, as part of a collaborative initiative we called salvation, to engage in a repair or a return or a healing flip in the mind, to bring about an end to something that doesn't exist in the first place. And I know that sounds like a paradox. That is a paradox, but the fact remains that the memory of God is within each of us. The true memory of God dwells within each of us. And Jesus said in the Bible, "Seek and ye shall find, knock and the door shall be open, and the truth shall set you free." It's like, well, that truth exists within each of us, but we have this veil of illusion, this veil of the physical world that distracts us all the time from seeking within, from seeking the kingdom of heaven first, which is ourself, our value to each other. And it takes great determination and willingness, a little willingness and great determination, to begin to join in that effort of salvation. And I like to use the analogy that imagine that you're in a hospital somewhere in eternity and you're in a coma, and I'm now in your dream, I'm now in your coma telling you this isn't reality. This is just a dream you're having. You're in a coma actually in eternity, and we're going to begin the awakening process so that you can wake up and see that everyone and everything you think you love is actually already with you already. And that requires a letting go of everything you think here. And it's really quite beautiful. I mean, you don't get out of this, I guess, without confronting that moment of terror where you believe that time came to replace eternity. But the idea of eternity means that there is no time. It's just funny how, the mind can overlook these simple contradictions. It's like, if God is everything, and God is spirit, and God created me in its likeness and created man in its likeness, then man is spirit, man is not flesh. Jesus says you are spirit, not flesh. And it's like, having had my own enlightenment experience of being spirit without flesh, being out of the physical realm, I guarantee that's the truth. But the predicament is, the encapsulation is that I find myself still here in the world, looking into that mirror that reflects the schism or the brokenness of my belief about myself, and seeing it in other people that I've projected out there, situations and events and people, and having to walk that path now of atonement or of healing, spiritual healing, where I take responsibility for what I see by putting my finger on my nose and accepting that there are no arseholes out there. There is no one who has less love than anyone else. There is no world. And that's going to be tough. But you're entitled to miracles. I'm entitled to miracles, and I've had to many times fall to my knees in prayer for situations and events that have showed up in my life that were unbearable. Cancer being one of the main ones when I was 31, that, man, I just wanted to die. I just wanted it to end. So, all right, well, I love you. Use the mirror. Look honestly at the situations that disturb you. See what it is that's reflected there. Give it a name. Just keep it simple. Give it a name. What do I see in the mirror? Is it jealousy? Is it greed? Is it, and then take responsibility for that in you, because you wouldn't know what that was unless you held a reference for it in your own mind. And that reference then governs your thinking. And that kind of thinking just brings more of the same. Judgment brings judgment. And I need to hear this every day. It's like every day I wake up, I need to offer my heart and my soul and everything to God, to whatever. I don't even care if you don't believe in God, but to higher power, to the possibility of a higher power if you don't believe in God. And hey, I didn't believe in God either. I went in and out of many churches and talked to many religious people and just walked away shaking my head in disbelief at the ideas of God that I came away with. And that's probably as much to do with their interpretation as my understanding. And like, really, there's no right or wrong in any of it. It's just, you have to find it for yourself. You know, you have to find the path yourself, which you have found if you're watching this video. And you have to do the work for yourself. So, all right, peace and love. And I'll see you in the next one.